The night my brother was honored as the pride of our family, my parents looked directly at me and said the words I had always feared. "You are the mistake we wish had never been born." I sat frozen as their voices cut into me, while champagne glasses clinked and laughter filled the room. They celebrated him with pride they had never once shown me. At the head of the table stood my father, Edward Langston, a man who carried himself as though the world belonged to him. With his booming voice and commanding presence, he raised a glass to toast my brother. My mother, Eleanor, elegant in her flawless gown, leaned into his side with a smile reserved only for the son who could do no wrong. My brother Adrian basked in the glow of their devotion, holding his Harvard acceptance letter as though it were a crown. The room adored him. Cameras flashed, relatives cheered, and he played the role of the golden child to perfection. I was seated at the far end of the table, out of the pictures, out of the laughter, deliberately kept on the sidelines as though I were an unwelcome guest in my own family. No one asked me to speak. No one turned their eyes my way. I was the second son, the shadow, the constant comparison they wielded against me. That night they shed even the last trace of civility and branded me publicly as the burden they regretted. The words weren't new, but hearing them out loud in front of others made it hard to breathe. My chest burned, yet I stayed silent as I always did, swallowing humiliation, shrinking smaller, letting them pretend I didn't exist. What I didn't know was that everything would change. One day they would be forced to see me differently, and it would all begin with the sealed envelope that found its way into my hands when I least expected it. Life in the Langston household was a performance, a perfect picture painted for the outside world. From the street, people saw wealth and success. The mansion in New York, the polished cars lined up in the driveway, the family name tied to one of the city's most powerful companies. To neighbors and colleagues, we were enviable. They didn't know what it meant to live unseen in a house where love was measured only in victories. Edward Langston, my father, was a man who worshipped power. Together with his own father, he had built Langston Enterprises into a $20 million empire. Ruthless, demanding, and brilliant in business, he carried those same qualities into his home. He expected perfection without compromise. When he looked at me, it wasn't with disappointment, it was with indifference, as if I were barely there. My mother, Eleanor, mirrored him in her own way. To the world, she was the epitome of grace, the perfect hostess at charity galas, the elegant figure at Edward's side. But beneath her polished exterior was a coldness few ever saw. For her, love was conditional. Adrian, with his achievements and charm, embodied everything she desired in a son. I, on the other hand, was little more than an afterthought in the house where I was supposed to belong. I heard my mother more often as a judge than a parent, her voice a constant correction. "Oliver, why can't you be more like Adrian?" she'd say. The question repeating so many times it stopped being a suggestion and settled like a verdict. Adrian was everything they wanted him to be. 2 years older, athletic, clever, effortlessly charming. When we were kids, his trophies sat in the grand hall under spotlights. My drawings and decent report cards were barely glanced at before being tucked away. Adrian never set out to hurt me, but he never reached back either. To him, I was simply the younger brother who followed, a shadow content to trail behind the favored son. He knew his place and wore it comfortably. The imbalance showed up everywhere. At dinner, Adrian took the seat beside our father. I sat farther down the table. At school performances, our parents filled the front row for his, and skipped mine as if I performed in private. His birthdays became lavish affairs. Mine were little more than a cake left on the kitchen counter. Over time I learned the truth. Nothing I did would alter how they already saw me. By 22, I was still in New York scraping by with part-time jobs and the feeling that the world had never been built to hold me. There was no place for me at Langston Enterprises. My father ensured it. He once told me with a casual shrug, "Oliver, not everyone is built for responsibility. Adrian was born for it. You should be grateful you don't have that burden." He framed it as mercy, but I heard only dismissal. Inside, I carried a quiet fury. I wanted to prove them wrong, to show I wasn't the mistake they declared. But years of repetition carved themselves into you. The voice that said, "You'll never be enough," became part of my own thoughts, a shadow I fought daily. When Adrian's acceptance to Harvard arrived, it felt like another locked door closing on me. My father announced it with the gravity of an event too important to be casual. "My son has been accepted to Harvard," he proclaimed, as if the house itself should stand and applaud. My mother wept happy tears. The mansion bloomed with banners and flowers. Relatives called with congratulations. I stood at the edge of it all, balancing a tray of drinks while guests moved through the rooms as if I were hired help. Then, in front of every smiling face, my father delivered the line that had haunted me. "At least one of our sons makes us proud. The other is the embarrassment we wish hadn't been born." My mother chimed her glass against his, nodding like a duet. Some guests shifted awkwardly. Others kept smiling as if nothing had happened. Not one person rose to my defense, not even Adrian. I remember my fingers digging into the edge of my chair until pain blurred into numbness. Shame spread like heat across my skin, but my voice stayed lodged behind my teeth. I did what I always did. I kept quiet. Silence felt safer than drawing even more attention to myself. As music swelled and congratulations echoed, I slipped out the back of the room and away from the celebration that had never been meant for me. I stood at the edge of the room, half hidden in the shadows, watching the family I was born into treat me like an outsider. I told myself this was simply the way things were. They would always celebrate Adrian, while I remained forgotten. He would inherit the future, and I would be left with whatever was left behind. What I could not imagine then was that the empire they worshipped would one day crack, and I would be the one holding the truth, strong enough to bring it down. The Harvard celebration was only the beginning of a long season of humiliation. My father's words from that night didn't fade with the music or the clinking of glasses. They lingered, a scar pressed deep into me, the son they regretted. I carried it everywhere, a constant reminder that I had no place in the house that was supposed to be mine as well. In the days that followed, Adrian's triumph became the only story anyone wanted to tell. My father paraded him through Langston Enterprises, introducing him to board members and executives as the heir to the empire. My mother gushed to her friends about her brilliant son bound for Harvard, certain he would one day manage fortunes and cement the family's name in history. Meanwhile, I was back in the city, wiping tables at a restaurant, stumbling into a dim apartment where rent devoured most of my paycheck. One evening, desperate for even a moment of recognition, I returned to the mansion. The air inside smelled of wine and roasted lamb, the dining hall full of guests toasting another of Adrian's achievements. My father caught sight of me in the doorway. His voice cut through the room, sharp and flat. "Oliver, you shouldn't be here unless you're invited. This night belongs to Adrian." The conversation fell silent, every eye turning toward me. I stammered something about wanting to congratulate my brother. then slipped out before anyone could sneer. Outside, the night air cooled my skin, but my chest still burned. Every attempt I made to step into their world ended the same way. They reminded me I didn't belong. The years that followed only carved the divide deeper. Adrian thrived at Harvard, stacking accomplishments like jewels while I worked wherever I could, fixing cars, stocking shelves, carrying trays in restaurants where customers barely noticed my existence. Each meager paycheck reminded me of the millions my father's company generated, while I struggled to pay for basic necessities. And still, a part of me longed for their approval. I told myself maybe someday I could prove I wasn't the failure they believed me to be. But then I would hear my father's voice from that night, the embarrassment we wish hadn't been born, and I knew the truth. To them, I wasn't a son. I was their shame. When Adrian's graduation day came, my parents prepared for it as if it were a coronation. We traveled to Cambridge together, though it was clear I was more an obligation than a welcome guest. Before the ceremony, my mother leaned toward me with her practiced smile and said, "Oliver, sit toward the back, away from the cameras. The family photos need to look proper. We can't have distractions." Her words were wrapped in politeness, but the edge was unmistakable. I was the distraction. The ceremony itself was grand. Adrian wore his cap and gown like a crown, carrying himself with the same confidence he always had. My parents glowed beside him, shaking hands with professors and alumni as though they too were part of his achievement. When the graduates threw their caps into the air, the crowd erupted with joy. I clapped along, though it felt like applause for a play in which I had no role. That evening, the celebration continued with a dinner lined with crystal glasses and glowing lights. Another night where I was present in body but invisible in every other way. The dining room buzzed with congratulations and the soft clink of crystal as my father stood again, larger than life at the head of the table. With that booming voice everyone had learned to obey, he lifted his glass and announced, "Tonight we celebrate my son, Adrian Langston. He has proven himself worthy of Harvard and of the Langston name." A murmur of approval rolled through the room. Edward didn't stop there. He straightened, chest swelling with the kind of pride that filled rooms, and declared what everyone had been waiting for. The family's future would be entrusted to Adrian. The company, the townhouse, the estate, everything would pass to him. The guests rose and applauded. Eleanor kissed Adrian's cheek as if sealing a private promise in public. He stood beneath the lights and accepted the adoration like a young lord, modest on the surface but hungry beneath. I sat at the far end, my chair pushed against the wall, the shadows swallowing half of me. The announcement sounded less like celebration and more like my final erasure. My father's words were a verdict delivered in front of witnesses. He had stripped away whatever claim I might have had to belonging. Heat rose in my throat and shame pinched my limbs. I kept my head down, pretending to inspect the linen on my plate while my insides unraveled. A small, relentless voice inside me wanted to rise up, to tell that room I existed, that I was not the footnote they made me out to be. But fear kept my hands clenched beneath the table, fear of making a scene, fear of being mocked. So I stayed small and silent as applause thundered on. Then the back doors opened. At first the chatter swallowed the sound, but soon the room noticed the measured footsteps crossing the marble. A man entered, tall, composed, dressed in a dark gray suit that matched the gravity of his stride. Silver threaded his hair and a leather briefcase hung from his hand. He moved through the crowd with the kind of quiet that makes people look up. Conversations faltered. Glasses paused mid-raise. He walked straight toward me as if guided by a line only he could see. When he reached my table, he stopped, leveled his gaze, and said my name without preamble. Oliver Langston? My throat closed. I nodded before I could find my voice. He placed a sealed envelope on the table in front of me, heavy with import, the kind of thing that changes the shape of rooms. Then he leaned in and, almost sotto voce, said, "It's time they heard the truth." The words felt like a candle being held to the darkness. I slid a fingertip under the flap and felt paper, a name, a fact waiting to be revealed. Around us, the room waited too, senses sharpened, unaware they were about to be pulled into a reckoning. The air grew thin with expectation, like the pause before a storm. For years I had hidden in the margins of their lives. Now a single envelope sat between me and the spotlight they had never meant to share. What I held in my hands could undo the story Edward had spent a lifetime writing, and I could feel the weight of that possibility like a heartbeat under my ribs. The word struck me like a jolt of lightning. I stared at the envelope resting against the white linen, its presence heavier than paper, as if it carried something far larger. Something sharp enough to cut through the world my father had built. From the head of the room, Edward's voice crashed through the air. "What is this? Who are you?" His tone carried both irritation and outrage that anyone would dare disrupt his carefully staged evening. The man turned toward him with quiet authority. "My name is Adrian Cole. I represent the estate of Elias Langston." The sound of my grandfather's name pulled the air from the hall. Conversations froze mid-sentence. Even the quartet in the corner faltered. Elias Langston had founded Langston Enterprises out of nothing, carving a fortune from sheer will. Though he had been gone for years, his name still commanded attention like a ghost no one could forget. Adrian Cole shifted his gaze back to me. "Mr. Langston left instructions that this envelope be delivered to you tonight, in this place before your family." Heat rose across my skin as I felt every eye in the room fix on me. Edward's face darkened with suspicion. Eleanor's complexion drained to white. Adrian frowned, his jaw tight, as though someone had just dared to steal the light he believed belonged only to him. The envelope sat on the table like a test. My hands shook as I reached for it. For a moment I thought about hiding it, waiting until I was alone to open it. That would be safer. The night would continue as it always had, me in silence, him in glory. I would be humiliated, but I would endure. But another voice inside me, one I had buried for years, refused to be quiet. Maybe this was nothing more than words meant to comfort me. Or maybe it was more. Whatever it was, my grandfather had chosen this moment, not another. He had trusted me to open it here, to stand where I had never been allowed to stand before. "Oliver," my father barked, his voice sharp as glass. "Whatever nonsense this is, handle it later. Sit down. Do not disrupt your brother's celebration." Once those words would have crushed me into silence, but now they only stoked the fire already burning in my chest. My pulse thundered as I pushed my chair back. The scrape of wood against marble echoed louder than I expected, sharp enough to slice through the chatter. For the first time in my life, all eyes were on me, not Adrian. I held the envelope high enough for everyone to see. "This was left for me by Elias Langston," I said, my voice steadier than my shaking hands. "He wanted it open tonight in front of all of you." Gasps moved through the crowd. Eleanor leaned urgently toward Edward, whispering something under her breath, but he waved her off with impatience. Adrian folded his arms, glaring at me as though I had invaded his throne. My thumb hovered over the wax seal, my palms damp, my heart racing against my ribs. Breaking it would change everything. Refusing would chain me forever to the shadows where they wanted me to stay. I thought of the years of silence, the birthdays forgotten, the shame branded into me like iron. I thought of that night when they said I should never have been born. And then I thought of my grandfather, the one person who had seen me, truly seen me. I remembered his hand on my shoulder and his quiet words. Oliver, you see people for who they are. That will always matter more than what they see in you. The memory steadied me. With a slow breath, I pressed my thumb against the seal and broke it open. The sound was soft, but in the silence of the hall it echoed like a crack of thunder. Inside was a sheet of paper, folded in thirds, crisp and deliberate. I unfolded it with trembling fingers, every movement heavy under the weight of hundreds of eyes waiting to see what truth my grandfather had hidden for me, and what storm it might unleash. My throat felt dry, but I forced the words out. This is the last will and testament of Elias Harper. The air in the hall shifted. My father's face hardened, his jaw locked in disbelief. My mother's hand trembled against the table, her knuckles white. Adrian straightened, the confidence he'd worn all evening now slipping away, leaving only unease behind. I looked down at the paper, and my chest tightened as I read the lines again. The inheritance, the company, the properties, none of it had been left to the son being celebrated, nor to the father who demanded obedience from everyone in his shadow. It had been left to me. The words carried a weight that made my pulse thunder in my ears. Still I lifted my head and repeated, stronger this time, "This is the last will and testament of Elias Harper." Every sound in the hall seemed to vanish. Dozens of faces turned toward me, waiting for the truth written on the page. My hands shook, but my voice no longer did as I read aloud. Elias Harper, being of sound mind, do hereby leave the whole of my estate, including Langston Holdings, the New York residence, and all accompanying assets, to my grandson, Oliver Langston. The silence shattered. Gas rippled across the room. A glass slipped from someone's fingers and broke on the marble floor. My mother pressed her lips together, her face pale, while Adrian's expression twisted with disbelief, anger flashing in his eyes. My father remained frozen for a moment, then slammed his glass so hard onto the table that the stem cracked.
"This is a lie!"
he thundered. My father would never choose him over me or Adrian, never. Before the murmurs could swell further, the lawyer, Mr. Cole, stepped forward with calm precision. This will was executed properly, witnessed, and registered with the courts. Elias Harper left clear instructions that it be opened tonight in this place. There is no mistake. It is binding. The whispers in the hall grew louder, shifting like a tide. Guests who had stood moments earlier to toast Adrian now turned their gazes toward me, wide-eyed, uncertain. For the first time in my life I wasn't invisible. My father's voice cut through the noise, louder, harsher. Oliver is nothing. He has no part in this family's legacy. I lowered the paper slowly and met his stare. You've told me that my entire life. But your father, he saw me differently. He saw something you refused to see. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely steady. Oliver, this cannot be right. There must be some mistake. Adrian stepped forward, his composure breaking. This is absurd. Everyone knows I earned this. Not him, he's done nothing. He doesn't deserve any of it. He jabbed a finger at me as though I were trespassing in his world. I held his gaze. Deserve? Do you think I never wanted to be acknowledged? That I didn't fight every day just to be noticed? Grandfather looked beyond titles and achievements. He saw who we really were when no one else was watching. Mr. Cole adjusted his glasses and read aloud one final passage. Elias Harper's words, "I leave my legacy to Oliver because he has endured with patience and integrity. Where others chased power, he remained humble. Where others demanded recognition, he held his ground in silence. This company was built on resilience and honesty, and Oliver is the only one who carries that spirit forward." The room fell into a hush so deep I could hear my own heartbeat. For the first time, I wasn't the forgotten son in the shadows. I was the one holding the future in my hands. The words from the will seemed to hang in the air, sealing the room in silence. My father's jaw tightened, the vein in his temple pulsing as though his fury could split him apart. Adrian's fists curled, his face red with rage, and my mother turned her head, unable to face me. Something shifted inside me. Years of dismissal, years of silence, years of believing I was nothing. All of it cracked apart. With my grandfather's words clutched in my hand, I no longer felt small. I no longer felt hidden. For the first time I stood taller, my voice steady. "All my life you told me I was nothing," I said, the sound carrying through the hall. "Tonight I stand here with proof that I am not only something. I am everything you tried to deny. You built walls to shut me out. Grandfather gave me the key to walk through them." Whispers filled the room. Some guests began to clap, tentative at first. Others simply stared, their shock too great for words. And then for the first time I saw my father falter. His mask of power, the untouchable authority he carried, cracked. Behind his hatred I saw it, fear. "This isn't fair." Adrian's voice broke as he shouted. "It was supposed to be mine." I turned toward him. "Fair?" My voice hardened. "You had their love, their pride, their praise. I had nothing. You grew in their light while I was left in their shadows. If you can't see the fairness in this moment, then you've never understood what it means to earn anything." The lawyer stepped forward, placing a second document in my hands. "This confirms your legal ownership, Oliver," he said. My fingers trembled as I took it, not from fear, but from the weight of finally being acknowledged. My father snarled, his voice low and dangerous. "This changes nothing. I built this empire. I will not let a weak, unwanted child take it from me." Mr. Cole stood his ground. "Legally it is Oliver's. You can fight it, but the courts will uphold this will. Your father made his decision." I looked out at the crowd, the people who had seen me fade into the background for years. "I was silent too long," I said. "That ends tonight. I will not be the shame you whisper about. I will carry the legacy my grandfather entrusted to me, and I'll do it with integrity, with strength, with everything you thought I lacked." The applause rose again, hesitant but growing. Not everyone clapped, but enough did to shift the air in the room. I felt it, power not born of vengeance but of truth. For the first time, Edward, Eleanor, and Adrian looked at me not as an afterthought, but as someone they could no longer ignore. My father moved first, storming toward the exit, his shoulders stiff with humiliation. His steps struck the marble floor like drums, but each one rang hollow. A man who had ruled every room, now stripped of control by the son he had spent years erasing. He didn't look at me. He couldn't. My mother stayed seated. Her hands were clasped tightly together, her eyes lowered as though in prayer. The woman who once radiated grace at every gathering now seemed smaller, as if weighed down by the emptiness of her choices. She had given every ounce of herself to Adrian, and now, when it mattered most, she had nothing left for me. And I stood there in the center of it all, no longer the forgotten son, but the heir my grandfather had chosen, holding the truth that none of them could deny. When I finally spoke her name, she winced. "Mother," I said quietly, but Eleanor only turned her head, refusing to meet my eyes. Her silence cut deeper than any insult. Adrian stood rigid where he was, pale and trembling. His voice cracked as he whispered, "This isn't right. It was supposed to be mine." He repeated the words as though chanting them might bend reality back in his favor. But no matter how many times he said it, nothing changed. The legacy he believed belonged to him was now mine. I looked at him and felt no triumph, no craving for revenge. "Only truth, Adrian," I said. "You had everything I ever wanted. Their love, their pride, their applause. But you wanted more. You wanted me erased. Tonight proves you can't erase me. I will carry this name not with arrogance but with the strength it deserves." Guests shifted uneasily, whispering among themselves. Some avoided my gaze, unwilling to take a side. Others gave me small nods as though they had long seen the cruelty, but never dared speak against it. In that moment I realized my fight had never been only with my family. It had also been with the silence of everyone who watched and let it happen, but now they too had to face the truth. As Adrian Cole closed his briefcase, he gave me a small nod. It wasn't the kind of respect born of wealth, but of recognition. "Your grandfather trusted you for a reason," he said quietly. "Never forget why." I carried those words with me as I walked out of the hall that night, the envelope still in my hand. The cool air struck my face, and for the first time in years I breathed freely. The shame that had weighed on me was gone, replaced by a steady fire in my chest. I was no longer the boy they had called an embarrassment. I was the man my grandfather had chosen to protect his life's work. In the weeks that followed, the family fractured. Edward tried to challenge the will, but the courts upheld it word for word. His pride took a blow he could never recover from, and though he fought, the law was not on his side. Eleanor retreated from the public, her perfect image ruined. Adrian tried to go on as if nothing had changed, but the bitterness of loss never left his face. And me. I stepped into a role I never imagined. I walked into Langston Industries not as the invisible son, but as its rightful heir. At first, the employees looked at me with doubt, but in time with respect. I worked harder than ever, determined to prove my grandfather right. I didn't want to be remembered as the son who inherited by chance. I wanted to be remembered as the man who rebuilt his name with honor. Looking back now, I see the truth clearly. Rejection shaped me, but it did not break me. Years of humiliation gave me the strength to stand tall when it mattered most. And when the lawyer placed that envelope in my hand, I was ready. So if there's anything to take from my story, it is this. Being unwanted by those you love does not make you worthless. Sometimes the ones who try hardest to dismiss you are the very ones who fear what you might become. Your worth is not theirs to define. It is proven by the choices you make when no one believes in you. I was once the son they wished had never been born. Now I am the heir to a legacy built on truth, and no denial can strip that away.